Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Alan Cardoza. Our country gets one chance each decade to count its population. The census clause in the Constitution requires actual enumeration of each person, but it gives Congress authority in figuring out how to count each person. The data that's collected is supposed to determine the number of seats each state has in the House of Representatives. It's also used to distribute $1 trillion in federal funds to local communities for everything from schools and healthcare programs to infrastructure and criminal justice. Obviously, it's important that these numbers are as accurate as possible. With the next census approaching in 2020, the counting will include an increasingly diverse and growing population, the biggest we've possibly ever seen. And like everything else these days, the process has become extremely political. The Trump administration wants to include a question for all census recipients about their citizenship status, citing that the question has always been there.
This is something that has been part of the census for decades and something that the Department of Commerce felt strongly needed to be included again.
But not everyone agrees, and the concern is that asking people about their status may threaten the accuracy of the count.
If the question isn't answered correctly throughout a whole state, that can totally mess up a lot of the budgeting, from what I understand.
I think it's a big deal because a lot of people obviously aren't, citizens. They're immigrants coming from here. To bring that back to ask such like a personal question like that is going to definitely bring some ill will towards the government.
On Point's Tien has more.
Thank you, Alan. I want to thank my guests for joining me today. I have here with me Soila Rodriguez, who's the data manager for the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. And then I have Nick Kimball, the city manager for the city of San Fernando. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you for having us.
So let's go ahead and get right into this. The first thing I want to ask is, what exactly is the census and why is it so important to count Americans? Let's start. Yeah, let's go ahead and start with you.
The census is important. It distributes $700 billion of tax revenue, right, to the different states, and depending on the population and how many people are counted, that's how the resources are distributed. The census also makes sure to accurately count everybody, whether they're a citizen or not, and the census is important for us to be part of and participate in order to give those resources that our communities need. A lot of our communities depend on healthcare, on SNAP, on our roads to be safe to drive on. And so in order for those resources to be distributed correctly, we have to make sure that everybody's counted on the census.
Okay. Did you have anything to add to that?
I know just from a city perspective, so a lot of federal funds are allocated through the census, which is really important, but even a lot of state funding. So in addition to the federal funding is with, Head Start programs, free lunch programs, that type of thing. State funding also uses the census per capita data to give out, to allocate funds to different jurisdictions. So again, if we don't have an accurate count, then we're going to be underfunded and not be able to provide the right level of services to our community.
Okay, so we know that there's a lot of issues, a lot of concerns regarding the recent push to add a citizenship question to the census, right? And one of the big things is, why is asking about citizenships why does asking about it threaten the accuracy of the census? You want to get us started?
Sure. Adding a citizenship question doesn't give an accurate count. I think it prevents our communities from actually counting themselves. A lot of California is mostly made up of immigrants, and it has a population of workers that half of them are immigrants and are children of immigrants. This creates more fear, and if they answer the question, the possibility of that information being shared with other people, that fear is causing them not to be part of the census. So ultimately, adding that question is a form for this administration to use that fear to not count those communities and to make their voices invisible and not heard.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. Actually, and I know for the community I work for, San Fernando, we're considered a hard-to-count community for those reasons. A lot of high immigrant population, a lot of English as a second language. Yeah. So one of the issues with the citizenship language is just a distrust of government, I believe. In the last few years, even my city council has been interested in locally how we enforce immigration laws, and just from my standpoint, from our police department's standpoint, we're here to protect all of our residents, whether they're citizens or not. The immigration status is something the federal government deals with. So, but there have been increased ICE raids over the last few years, and I think there's just a general fear that this data will be used. It won't be kept confidential as it's supposed to by law. It will be used, to kind of further certain policies of this or any future administration, and I think that's where the fear comes from.
Right. But isn't it important to know how many citizens and non-citizens live in our communities?
So again, if you don't mind, I'll start real quick. So I know for my community, it's extremely important.
Yeah.
So the last census, our count I think was 23,500 individuals. That was 10 years ago. I think it's gone up by about 200 or 300 individuals since then. It's because they do an inflationary factor. If you drove around our streets and look at the parking and how impacted it is, we probably realistically have more like 33,000 residents. But because there is that fear, historically there's been that fear, and it's been heightened the last few years. Cities like the city of San Fernando have a real challenge being able to keep up with how do we provide the right level of service when probably 20-25% of our population isn't accounted for in the census.
Do you have anything to add to that, Soila?
Yeah, like Cherla, we work to uplift the immigrant community and making sure that for everything they're counted and their voices are counted, and having that added onto the form, it could potentially silence them, but also the possibility of using this as a form of resistance also.
Okay, so if we did want to kind of get that sort of information, would you say there's any other alternatives to getting that?
I think they already do have that through the census, through the sampling that they do, through shorter surveys that they do throughout the years. I don't think that adding the question to the census form could accurately return data that is accurate about the counts. Like Nick said, there's so many people that are not counted and that are counted. Our community is already hard to count, and California is one of the largest hard to count in the nation. And so adding that question will ultimately not guarantee accurate counts.
What about you, Nick? If we wanted an accurate count, what do you think would be a good alternative?
That's a difficult question. I don't know that the census is the right forum for that question. That data is probably important for certain policymakers to know. How do we get that? That is a tough question. I think from our standpoint, from city standpoint, even from the state of California's standpoint, maybe let's think of a different process to extract that data as opposed to the census, which has such wide-reaching implications on the census, where if you're just interested in citizenship, let's figure out a different process on how to get that information, that data.
Okay. Well, the citizenship question isn't particularly a new thing that they had on the census. They did have it originally, and then they took it off around the 1950s. Why do you think they might have taken the citizenship question off initially?
Although I'm probably the elder statesman in the room, I wasn't around in the 50s, so I'm not sure exactly what the policy was back in the 50s. I mean, clearly, it was a much different time at that point. Just got done with World War II. Immigration was it was welcomed at that point. There wasn't a national policy, for building a wall and these other protectionist policies with tariffs and other things that this administration are pushing. So clearly, adding this back to the census is just another piece of that sort of protectionist policy that's been pushed over the last few years.
Okay, Soila?
Yeah, I agree. I think it was different times, and now that we're for this 2020 census, there's, I feel like it's a way for the administration to weaponize the census and to create more fear within the community.
Okay. Well, yeah. So since you mentioned the administration and everything, is there like some sort of political agenda rather than trying to actually get an accurate count. Why exactly do you think this is happening now in 2019?
I think we know that there's a national narrative, right, about blaming immigrants for everything that's going on, and I think this is more of a political agenda to try to once again silence the voices of immigrants and really underrepresent them in the government.
And I think we can kind of flip that political narrative on its head. There is a political agenda, and I think the agenda is most likely to try and, especially a state like California, where we have a very high immigrant population, to try to marginalize us even more. We already are net subsidizers of the federal government. We pay in more than we get out. The way to flip this on its head is to have everyone counted, because that reallocates the number of the number of congressional representatives the state would have. If everyone's counted accurately, we're going to have, we will gain congressional seats politically, and just knowing the political environment of California, I think that would probably make it a little bit more, that might be the opposite of what's being intended by this current administration, but we can work that to California's favor and change it from being a net to at least getting our fair share of federal funds and being able to service all of these different communities that we have to service them now. That's something that we're providing that service regardless of federal funding. So we want to make sure we get that federal funding, and politically, we can gain some seats in Congress if everyone's counted.
Okay. So obviously we can't really use that political justification to fully justify adding the citizenship question, right? So how exactly would the administration be justifying putting the citizenship question back in?
Well, I believe, I'm a firm believer in data, whatever that data is. So in order to make good policy, you need to have not just anecdotal data, not just stories, you need to actually know what is out there. So on a justification for including it, taking politics out of it, it's probably not a terrible question, because then okay, this is our percentage of non-citizens that we're providing services to. How can we make sure that they're part of that discussion and are helping to pay into the system we have that provides these services. So there may be a policy there's a policy argument for it, for that question. But there also is a certain level of responsibility that government has to make sure that all this data remains confidential and is not used, to hurt the individuals that are filling it out. I don't believe that it's going to be used that way. However, that's obviously the fear, and it's, while their justification may be there, I don't know that everyone believes that as the justification.
Right. Okay, so let's go a bit more into the census itself. So why is the census such a big deal to the public, and why is the citizenship question a big deal to the public, especially in a city like Los Angeles? Soila?
Well, LA is already a hard-to-count county, and the census is such an important factor because it provides those resources that we need. Our communities already pay their own taxes, and they should be able to benefit from those resources. Being able to count themselves also a form of resistance against the Trump administration and what they're trying to say, like Nick said. And adding the citizenship question is such a controversial point. Because it's, like I said, trying to get people to be undercounted, especially in a really hard-to-count community.
Yeah, I just sort of echo everything that we've sort of said. I think, I think the census, and we can talk more about how important it is, but it really is. It only happens once every 10 years. It's required by law, and it's confidential by law. So we need to really trust that that's how all of this data is going to be used, and having that data is very valuable. Having accurate data is very valuable, again, in making good policy.
What about in terms of the funding aspects of it?
So I know for my particular city, one of the biggest sources of funds we get federally, most of our funds are local, but we get community development block grants, and those are used locally to do a lot of economic development type programs, some facade rehabs, some code enforcement to make sure that our streets and our property remains nice in the city. We also use it to pave some of the local streets, especially in California. We have a lot of housing issues. We have a lot of deferred maintenance on infrastructure issues, and anytime we can get federal funding in addition to the state funding that we get, every dollar of that gets poured back into the community, and we're all using the roads, whether you're a citizen or you're not a citizen. Everyone's using that infrastructure, so we need to make sure that we size it right, that we maintain it correctly for the amount of use that it's actually getting.
Does this also affect things like transportation, school, healthcare, and whatnot?
I know for our community, some of the more important programs that are provided through federal funding are, Head Start programs, free and reduced lunch programs, a lot of after-school programs. There's a lot of education-related funding, and then there's just a lot of social safety net funding that is really important. Again, in California in particular, because we have such a high cost of living, especially compared to the rest of the, $20 an hour, $40,000 a year, you can't even live on that in California. Whereas, in other places, that's plenty of money to be almost middle class. So,
right.
So getting, our fair share of all of these social safety, the safety net services, is critical to making sure that the quality of life in California remains relatively high.
Okay, so how does all this federal funding exactly get allocated?
Well, most of it, so it gets filtered down through the state. So the state will say, because California, you're 40% of the population, is pulling numbers out, you'll get this amount of funding, and usually the state government either then they give it to local jurisdictions. We'll get it again based on per capita. So it's a percentage based. So everything is per capita, especially on funding, and it's your income levels are driven. So the lower your income level is per capita, the more funding you'll get. So there's all these these complex formulas, distribution formulas, but they're all based on data from the census. And if that data is not right, then you're not going to get the correct amount to provide the service you're looking at.
Okay, so there's been talks recently about the Supreme Court actually ruling in favor of putting the census question, the citizenship question into the census. Do you believe this is true, and could this be related to the political divide in our country, Soila?
Well, I think we've seen that mostly the Trump administration has been trying, and Republicans have been trying to make the courts more conservative. We saw that with Obama when he tried to name a Supreme Court judge, but was delayed through delayed tactics. And now that Trump's in office, he's been able to name 2 judges that are very conservative as well. So in that sense, we do have reason to fear, because the courts are conservative, that this question could potentially be on the census 2020.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just, so a few weeks ago was when they heard Supreme Court heard testimony, from both sides of the issue, based on the questioning that the judges went through. It seems likely those that watch the Supreme Court closely, their money is on the fact that it will be upheld and that the question will be on the census. So I know from our standpoint and from the city's standpoint, we're moving forward on expressing how important it is, the census is, regardless whether the question's on there or not. We have to be prepared for both. If you prepare for the worst and hope for the best, then we'll be surprised. We'll be pleasantly surprised if it is not included. But if it's included, we're still going to get the message out there. Make sure that we're accurately counted, and just really have that be a grassroots effort, and say the best way to throw around your political weight, if you will, is to actually count yourself. We have a slogan in San Fernando that we're starting, I count. And it's really meant to personalize that you do count, but in order to count, you need to fill out the census, and then you'll get your fair share. We'll get our fair share of resources to be able to implement our own local policies.
You mentioned how they were talking about it a little bit earlier. Would you say, if it does go through, would you say it would be based more on how it was pitched to them, or would you say it's more based around their existing political viewpoints?
I'm sure if you asked them, they would say it was related to how they they were pitched. They listened to the two arguments. You know, we're all humans. We all have our personal bias. We don't ever check those at the door. You know, how you grew up, your environment you grew up in, is going to impact how you see the world, your worldview as you get older. So I'm sure that's played into what their potential decision will be. We hope that they just weigh the value of the arguments and make a decision based on how good those arguments are.
Okay, Soila, this question's a little bit more for you. Could you explain a bit more into detail about, because we talked about the accuracy earlier, right? Could you go a bit more into detail about people potentially lying on their census? Would they lie on it? And what would people generally be worried about if there was a citizenship question on there?
I think just like we've echoed everything, right? Like that information being shared about their citizenship status, where they live, how they're living, that's also potentially our communities, you know, are struggling to make a living, so they live in one-bedroom apartments or they live in garages, and so that information, they're scared to share it because they don't want to hear a knock on the door from the city council or something, asking why they're living that way, and they can be, you know, and so that information being shared is something that they're scared of, and so that they could potentially not fill out the census at all. So what we're trying to do at Chile is just really putting the word out as well to fill out the census, to make yourself count, that information won't be shared, and it won't be shared for 72 years, that you know, if anyone ever were to share that information, they would face 5 years in jail and $250,000 in fine. And so just really making our communities understand that that information won't be shared, and that they should trust that the census is something that would benefit them, and that those are resources that they should be benefiting from.
Yeah, so you did mention that both of you mentioned that this is supposed to be all confidential information, but could we see the citizenship question being used for other motives, like potentially deporting certain groups or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's already the mistrust that we have in the government that we've seen has been used against our communities, you know, with the banning of certain countries, with the asylum seekers that are coming in, and how all the information has been used also. And so potentially it could be used, but I think that we have to make sure that we continue to educate our community and let them know that this information can't be used against them, and that we are here to also, you know, hold their representatives accountable so that they make sure that information is not used against them.
Okay, and what is Chirla exactly doing to kind of help your constituents understand this stuff more, and understanding how to fill these types of things out and whatnot, and then kind of getting over the fears?
Okay. Yeah, we're launching, we already launched our Contamos Contigo campaign, which essentially is helping to count everybody in our communities. We're going to be doing calls to our community to make sure that they're filling out the census come March. We're also educating everybody at Cheerlies, basically in the campaign. We're making sure to talk about it in any meetings we have, any encounters we have with our community. We're also making sure that we're reaching to those too hard to count in San Bernardino and Orange County, in San Fernando, Sacramento, the Central Valley, High Desert, all those areas we're focusing on making sure that we're reaching out to them. Right now what we're doing is doing educational presentations, and also we have a postcard that we're making sure that every community member we talk to fills out, and they are pledging to fill out the form come March. And then we will go ahead and send that card back again in March to remind them that they've pledged themselves to fill out the form. If they need more help, we're also opening our Chirla offices to help them fill out the form online. And then through the calls, we're also making sure to remind them and also helping them fill out the form then.
Okay, and then for both of you to kind of close this all off, what can we do to educate the general population who might not be familiar with the census and this type of these current events, right? How can we educate them?
Well, I think from our point of view, and as I mentioned before, San Fernando is forming a complete count committee, and what we're doing is we're really working with some local nonprofits, business groups, so the Chamber of Commerce, the local Tatavian band of Indians, the local tribe, and then some local healthcare groups, and then churches. Churches are a real important organization. They're a trusted organization. So we have a lot of groups that get together, and we really want this to be a grassroots effort. You know, I work for the city. I know I'm very trustworthy, but you know, just because I work for the government, I'm probably not the best spokesperson to say, just trust us. But if we can work with other nonprofits that also understand how important the census is, then we'll get that grassroots effort. We're working with the kindergarten group in a couple of days to put a poster together about iCount and get the kids excited, because if the kids, you know, the younger generation gets excited about it, I think that goes a long way with them explaining to their parents, this is how important this is. You know, I've learned that in order for me to continue to get, you know, these reduced lunches at school, we need to make sure that the funds keep coming our way. So I think the grassroots effort is really important in working with trusted organizations like churches and religious organizations. That's really going to help educate people and make them and sort of allay some of those fears that they currently have, and so that we're just trying to create an environment for that in San Fernando.
Do you want to add anything to close that off?
Yeah, just you know, passing on the word is something that we're focusing on as well. Just educating one and passing it on, making sure that we're focusing on our families and then our friends, our cousins, our tios and tias, to make sure that they fill out the census as well.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for now. So, and thank you guys for joining us.
Thank
you for having us.
Hi, Meals on Wheels.
I'm Marco. I'm a college student and I volunteer as a driver for Meals on Wheels.
I think it's awesome meeting these people. I mean, they're so interesting. They've had so many wonderful experiences in life. Your community helps to raise you up into the person that you become. Meals on Wheels is a great way to give back to that community.
I want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat apples and bananas?
Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sundays at 5 and on LA 36 at 8 on Thursday nights. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Alan Cardoza.